I'll never forget the night I drove across the Nevada desert, a journey that still haunts me to this day. There's something about the isolation of those barren highways, the emptiness that stretches on forever, that seems to lure strange, inexplicable occurrences out of the shadows. It was late July, just before my senior year of college. My best friend, Jack, and I had planned a road trip from California to Colorado, with stops along the way to hike, explore, and soak up the open road. We had an old Ford Bronco we'd been fixing up for months, and it seemed like the perfect adventure before life would inevitably pull us in different directions. Our plan was simple: drive as much as we could during the day, find a motel or campsite by night, and repeat until we reached Colorado. We were both experienced campers, and the idea of sleeping in the car if we couldn't find a place didn't faze us. But, as we would soon learn, not every part of the country is as welcoming as a highway map might suggest. The first couple of days went smoothly. We drove through the Sierra Nevadas, passing mountain lakes and forests, stopping when something caught our eye. The weather was perfect: clear skies, not too hot, not too cold. The Bronco was running like a dream. Jack and I would take turns driving while the other would navigate, play music, or just talk. It was everything we'd hoped it would be. By the third day, we'd crossed into Nevada. The landscape shifted dramatically, from the lush greens of California to the stark, sandy emptiness of the Nevada desert. The sun beat down mercilessly, and there were long stretches of road where we didn't see a single car or sign of life. That kind of emptiness makes you feel small, like you're a lone ship lost at sea. We were heading towards a small town called Eerie, planning to stay there for the night, when we hit a particularly desolate stretch of Highway 50, the loneliest road in America, as it's called. The name didn't seem like an exaggeration. It was late afternoon, and the sky was already starting to bleed into that eerie twilight where the desert seems even more alien. That's when we saw the car. It was an old, beat-up sedan, pulled over on the side of the road with the hood up. I slowed down as we approached, and Jack squinted through the windshield. There was a man standing next to the car, waving us down. "Should we stop?" I asked Jack, feeling uneasy. There was something off about the whole situation, though I couldn't put my finger on it. Jack hesitated. "I don't know, man. There's no one around for miles. What if he's stranded?" We had both heard enough stories about roadside scams and robberies to know that stopping wasn't always the best idea. But we had also been in situations where someone stopped to help us out, and it felt wrong to just drive past. "Let's at least see what he wants," Jack said finally, "but keep the engine running." I pulled the Bronco up behind the sedan, leaving a good distance between the two cars, and rolled down the window slightly. The man approached us, his hands raised in a non-threatening gesture. "Hey, sorry to bother you guys," he said, his voice shaky. "My car broke down, and there's no cell service out here. Do you think you could give me a ride to the next town?" He was tall and gaunt, with hollow cheeks and sunken eyes. His clothes were dusty and worn, as if he'd been out there for a while. I noticed his hands trembling slightly as he spoke. I glanced at Jack, who gave me a subtle shake of his head. Something about the guy set off alarm bells for both of us, but neither of us wanted to be the one to outright refuse help. "Sorry, man," I said. "We're not really comfortable giving rides to strangers, but we can call someone for you when we get to town, if that helps." The man's face twisted into a look of frustration, then desperation. "Please," he begged, stepping closer to the window. "It's getting dark, and I've been out here for hours. I just need a lift. It's only about 30 miles up the road. I swear, I'm not going to cause any trouble." I could feel Jack tensing up beside me. I was about to repeat our offer to call someone for him when the man's demeanor shifted entirely. His eyes narrowed, and his voice dropped to a low, almost threatening tone. "You're making a big mistake," he said. For a moment, I thought he was going to reach through the window, but instead, he took a step back. His eyes locked on mine in a way that made my skin crawl. He stood there for a second longer, as if daring us to change our minds, then slowly turned and walked back toward his car. "Let's go," Jack whispered urgently. I didn't need to be told twice. I hit the gas and sped off down the road, glancing in the rearview mirror. The man stood there, watching us, until we were nothing more than a speck on the horizon. "That was creepy as hell," I muttered, my heart still racing. Jack nodded, staring straight ahead. "Yeah, I don't like this stretch of road, man. Something's off." We drove in silence for the next half hour, the desert around us growing darker as the sun dipped below the horizon. The Bronco's headlights cut through the blackness, illuminating the seemingly endless road ahead. Then, out of nowhere, Jack turned to me. "Did you see any houses or buildings when we passed?" I frowned. "No. Why?" "Look in the rearview mirror," he said, his voice low and tense. I glanced up at the mirror, expecting to see the empty road behind us, but instead, there was a pair of headlights following us. They were distant, but unmistakable. "Is that the same car?" I asked, my voice rising with anxiety. "I don't know," Jack replied, "but I don't like it." For the next few miles, the car stayed behind us, never gaining ground, but never falling back either. It was as if it was matching our speed perfectly, keeping just far enough away to avoid suspicion, but close enough to make us nervous. We decided to speed up, hoping to lose the car. I pressed down on the gas, pushing the Bronco to its limit, but the headlights stayed with us, unwavering. Jack turned in his seat, trying to get a better look. "That's the same car," he said grimly. "I'm sure of it." My heart pounded in my chest. We were miles from the nearest town, with no other cars on the road, and this guy was following us. I didn't know what he wanted, but I knew it couldn't be good. Suddenly, Jack pointed ahead. "There's a turnoff coming up. Take it." I spotted the narrow gravel road he was talking about, barely visible in the dim light. Without hesitation, I swerved onto it, kicking up dust as the Bronco's tires skidded on the loose gravel. We bumped along the uneven road, hoping to lose the car in the darkness. For a few moments, it seemed like we had. The headlights disappeared behind us, and the only sound was the crunch of gravel under the tires. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was a figure standing in the middle of the road, directly in front of us. I slammed on the brakes, and the Bronco screeched to a halt, skidding to a stop just a few feet from the figure. It was the man from the broken-down car. But how? How could he have gotten here so quickly? He stood there, perfectly still, his face obscured by the shadows, but I knew it was him. There was no mistaking the gaunt frame, the hollow eyes. "What the hell?" Jack whispered, his voice trembling. Before I could react, the man stepped forward, walking slowly toward the Bronco. Panic surged through me, and I threw the car into reverse, backing up as fast as I could. The man continued to approach, his pace unnervingly calm, as if he knew we had nowhere to go. Then, without warning, the headlights of the car we had been trying to escape appeared behind us, blocking our path. We were trapped. "Go, go!" Jack shouted, but I was already turning the wheel, desperately trying to maneuver the Bronco off the road and into the desert. We jolted over rocks and brush, the tires spinning in the loose sand as I floored it. I didn't care where we were going. I just knew we had to get away. The man disappeared into the rearview mirror as we sped through the desert, the Bronco bouncing and rattling violently. The headlights of the car behind us faded into the distance, and soon we were alone again, surrounded by nothing but darkness and silence. For what felt like an eternity, we drove aimlessly through the desert, not daring to stop or slow down. Eventually, the adrenaline began to wear off, and exhaustion set in. "We need to find the road," Jack said, his voice shaky. I nodded, scanning the horizon for any sign of civilization. After what felt like hours, we finally found our way back to the highway, but the experience had left us both shaken. We made it to Eerie later that night, but neither of us slept much. The next morning, we got the Bronco checked out at a local garage, just to make sure it hadn't sustained any damage during our off-road escape. The mechanic looked it over and gave us the all clear, but before we left, he asked us a strange question. "You boys didn't take the old mine road, did you?" Jack and I exchanged confused glances. "What mine road?" I asked. The mechanic wiped his hands on a rag and nodded toward the desert. "There's an old gravel road that leads out to a ghost town near one of the abandoned mines. Folks around here say it's haunted. Cars break down, people disappear, that sort of thing." We didn't tell him about what had happened the night before, but the look on his face told me he knew we'd seen something out there. We cut our trip short after that, deciding to head back home instead of continuing on to Colorado. Neither of us talked much on the drive back, and when we finally parted ways, we didn't keep in touch for a long time. Years later, I still think about that night on the loneliest road in America. I've tried to rationalize what happened, telling myself it was just a strange coincidence, or that we let our imaginations get the best of us. But deep down, I know there was something out there, something more than just an abandoned car and a desperate man. I still have nightmares about it sometimes. In those dreams, I'm back in the Bronco, driving through the desert with Jack, and I see those headlights in the distance, following us. And no matter how fast we drive, they always catch up. I wasn't always afraid of the open road. In fact, road trips used to be my escape from the noise of everyday life. Something about driving for hours, with nothing but the horizon in front of me, always brought a sense of calm, even peace. That all changed after the summer of 2017, after a journey that still sends a shiver down my spine when I think about it. It's been years since that trip, but I still replay the events in my mind, trying to make sense of what happened on that lonely stretch of highway. I've come to realize that some things defy explanation, no matter how much you try to rationalize them. It started as a routine drive, one I had made countless times before. I was heading from my hometown in Southern California to visit a friend in Boulder, Colorado. I loved the long haul, winding through the desert and mountains, with nothing but the occasional gas station or diner to break the monotony. The route I always took was Interstate 70, but for reasons I can't fully explain, I decided to take the scenic route that time. It seemed like a harmless decision, one made out of boredom or maybe curiosity. Little did I know it would lead me to the most terrifying night of my life. I had left in the late afternoon, hoping to reach a small town in Utah by nightfall. The first few hours were uneventful. Just me, my old Chevy Silverado, and a playlist full of my favorite music. The sun was sinking low, casting a warm, golden glow over the desert as I crossed the Nevada border. I had just refueled at a lonely gas station and was back on the road when my GPS started acting up. Now, I know these things happen. Cell service drops, GPS glitches, especially out in the middle of nowhere. But this was different. The screen flickered, went black, then flashed back on, showing an entirely different route. Instead of directing me to the next major highway junction, it was pointing me toward a narrow, unmarked road, veering off into the desert. I should have ignored it. Every instinct told me to stick to the main road, but something about the change intrigued me. I was always up for a bit of adventure, and I figured, why not? It was probably a shortcut or some kind of alternate scenic route. Worst case scenario, I'd have to turn around and backtrack. So, I followed the new route. As soon as I turned onto the road, the landscape changed. The highway had been barren, but at least it was wide, smooth, and predictable. This road, however, was narrow and cracked, as if it hadn't been maintained in years. Dust kicked up behind my tires, and the air seemed to grow thicker with every mile I drove. The sun was almost gone now, and the sky bled into a deep, foreboding purple. I drove for about an hour, feeling more isolated with each passing minute. The road twisted and turned in unnatural ways, almost as if it was designed to lead travelers deeper into the desert. The lack of signs or any visible landmarks made it feel like I was driving through some kind of liminal space, a place that didn't really exist on any map. Eventually, I came to a fork in the road. Neither direction was marked, and my GPS was still glitching out, unable to pinpoint my location. I paused, unsure of which way to go. That's when I saw it, the first sign of life since I had left the main highway. Off to the right, there was a faint glow in the distance, like headlights. They flickered on and off, as if someone was parked far ahead. I figured it might be another traveler, or maybe even a local, who could point me in the right direction. Feeling a strange sense of relief at the prospect of human contact, I took the right path. As I got closer, I realized the lights weren't moving. Whoever it was, they were just sitting there, parked by the side of the road. The glow grew brighter, and soon I could make out the silhouette of an old pickup truck, older than mine, rusted out and covered in desert dust. There was no sign of anyone around it. I slowed to a stop, rolling down my window to peer into the truck. That's when I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The truck's engine was off, but the headlights were still on. I've been around enough vehicles to know that's not normal, especially not for a truck that looked like it hadn't moved in decades. I leaned out of the window, squinting into the dimming light. "Hello?" I called out. No response. The only sound was the wind, which had picked up, whistling through the cracks in the old truck's body. I wasn't about to stick around to find out what was going on. Something about the scene felt wrong, like I was intruding on something I wasn't meant to see. I pressed the gas and started to drive past. But just as I did, the truck's lights flickered off. I froze. For a moment, the only thing lighting the road was the pale glow of my own headlights. The darkness around me felt suffocating, as if the desert itself was closing in. I glanced back at the old truck, half expecting to see someone standing there, but there was nothing. Shaken, I sped up, eager to get as far away from that place as possible. The road grew rougher, and the sky had now turned pitch black. My headlights barely penetrated the darkness, casting long, jagged shadows on the rocks and shrubs along the road. Every so often, I thought I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, shapes flickering just beyond the edge of the light. But when I looked directly, there was nothing. About an hour later, I realized I hadn't passed another car since I'd seen that abandoned truck. No houses, no buildings, just an endless stretch of barren road. My gas gauge was starting to dip lower, and I was beginning to worry I'd run out of fuel before I found a town or even a gas station. Then, just as I was starting to consider turning around, I saw it, a sign for a rest stop. The sign was old and weathered, but the words were clear enough. Rest area, 2 miles ahead. Relief washed over me. I figured I'd stop, stretch my legs, maybe get a drink from the vending machine if they had one. Even if the place was run down, it was better than being stuck out on the road with no gas. I kept driving, watching the odometer carefully, and soon enough, I spotted the dim lights of the rest area up ahead. It wasn't much. A small parking lot with a few picnic tables, a couple of vending machines, and a dingy restroom building. The lights were old, flickering weakly, casting long shadows over the cracked pavement. The place looked like it hadn't been maintained in years, but at that point, I didn't care. I parked the truck and stepped out into the cool night air. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of the wind rustling through the dry brush. I stretched, trying to shake off the growing sense of unease that had settled over me. Something about the rest stop felt off, like it was waiting for something or someone. I glanced around the lot, noticing another car parked near the restroom. It was an old sedan, covered in a thin layer of dust, but the windows were rolled down slightly, as if someone had been there recently. Yet, as I looked closer, I couldn't see anyone inside. Trying to push down my growing discomfort, I decided to check out the vending machines. I fished some change out of my pocket and approached the machines, my footsteps echoing eerily in the empty lot. That's when I heard it, a faint noise, like a whisper carried on the wind. I froze, listening. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but then I heard it again, clearer this time. A soft, distant voice, like someone calling out for help. "Hello?" I called, my voice sounding too loud in the stillness. The wind picked up, carrying the whisper away. I stood there for a moment, heart pounding, straining to hear it again. But the only sound was the rustling of the leaves and the hum of the vending machines. I shook my head, telling myself it was just the wind. I dropped my change into the machine and grabbed a bottle of water. As I turned to head back to my truck, I noticed something strange out of the corner of my eye. The sedan, the one parked near the restroom, its headlights were on now. I hadn't seen anyone get in or out of the car, and I certainly hadn't heard an engine start. But there they were, two bright beams cutting through the darkness, pointed directly at me. My mouth went dry. My instinct told me to get back in my truck and leave, but something, some morbid curiosity perhaps, kept me rooted to the spot. I stared at the car for what felt like an eternity, waiting for something to happen. And then, the door opened. It wasn't a quick, normal movement. The door creaked open slowly, deliberately, as if someone, or something, was taking its time. A figure stepped out of the car, but it was too dark to make out any details. All I could see was a tall, shadowy silhouette, standing perfectly still beside the sedan, staring in my direction. I took a step back, my heart hammering in my chest. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching me. That's when I decided I had seen enough. I turned on my heel and hurried back to my truck, fumbling for my keys as I approached. The wind howled around me, and I could feel the weight of the figure's gaze on my back as I unlocked the door and jumped inside. I slammed the door shut and locked it, breathing heavily as I started the engine. The headlights of the sedan were still on, but the figure had vanished. I didn't wait to see if it would come back. I threw the truck into reverse and peeled out of the parking lot, tires screeching against the pavement. As I sped down the road, my mind raced. What the hell had just happened? Was it some kind of prank? Or had I stumbled onto something far more sinister? I didn't have time to dwell on it. My focus was on getting as far away from that rest stop as possible. I drove for what felt like hours, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, my eyes darting to the rearview mirror every few seconds. The road was empty, save for the occasional tumbleweed blowing across the asphalt. Eventually, the tension began to fade, replaced by exhaustion. The rest stop, the figure, the whispers. It all felt like a bad dream, something my tired mind had conjured up in the isolation of the desert. But as much as I tried to convince myself it wasn't real, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something I wasn't meant to see. It wasn't until I reached the outskirts of a small town that I finally let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The glow of streetlights and the sight of other cars on the road brought a sense of relief that was almost overwhelming. I pulled into a gas station, refueled, and sat in the parking lot for a long time, trying to calm my nerves. I never found out what happened that night. I never went back to that rest stop, and I never spoke to anyone about what I saw, not even my friend in Boulder. The whole experience felt too surreal, too nightmarish to put into words. But I've thought about it a lot since then. I've wondered if maybe that road wasn't meant to be on my GPS at all. Maybe I wasn't supposed to take that turn. And maybe, just maybe, there are places in this world that exist beyond the maps. Places where the rules of reality start to blur. I still love road trips, but now, every time I drive through the desert, I make sure to stick to the main highways, because there are roads out there that lead to places you don't want to go. I've always been a fan of road trips. There's something about the open road, the miles of endless highway stretching out ahead, that makes me feel free. The feeling of leaving everything behind and just driving. It's intoxicating. Or, at least, it was. I'm not sure if I'll ever feel that way again. It was the summer of 2019. I was 27, single, and living in a small town in Ohio. I'd just gone through a messy breakup, the kind that leaves you questioning everything, and I needed to clear my head. I had time off from work, so I decided to take a solo trip. No real destination in mind, just me, my car, and the road. I packed a few essentials, some clothes, snacks, a cooler of water, and hit the road on a Friday morning. My plan was to drive south, maybe head toward Tennessee or Georgia, and see where the road took me. I wasn't looking for adventure, just a bit of solitude, time to think, and maybe some scenic views along the way. The first day went smoothly. I took Route 23, a long, winding highway that cuts through the heart of Ohio, heading south. The weather was perfect, the skies clear, and the traffic light. I had my music playing, the windows down, and I felt like I was finally starting to breathe again. By late afternoon, I'd made it deep into the Appalachian foothills. The landscape had changed, the flat farmland giving way to rolling hills and dense forests. It was beautiful, but also eerily quiet. The further I drove, the fewer cars I saw. By the time the sun started to set, I realized I hadn't passed another vehicle in nearly an hour. I wasn't worried, though. I liked the isolation. Besides, I'd planned to pull off the road and find a motel for the night. I wasn't in a hurry, and the idea of sleeping in a cheap roadside motel felt like a small adventure in itself. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, something shifted. The first sign that things were going wrong came in the form of a detour. I'd been driving for hours, following Route 23 through small towns and stretches of empty road, when I saw the detour sign. The road was closed ahead for construction, and the sign directed me onto a narrow side road that wound through the hills. I didn't think much of it at the time, just another inconvenience, part of the journey. I turned onto the road and kept driving. The further I went, the narrower the road became. At first it was paved, but soon the asphalt gave way to gravel and then to dirt. Trees loomed on either side, their branches reaching over the road, casting long shadows in the fading light. I should have turned around then. I should have seen the warning signs, the way the road seemed to get darker, the way the air felt heavier. But I didn't. I kept going, convinced that the detour would eventually lead me back to the main highway. That's when I noticed the car behind me. It was a beat-up old sedan, its headlights flickering in the growing darkness. At first, I thought it was just another traveler, someone else who had taken the same detour. But as I kept driving, I realized that the car wasn't following at a normal distance. It was too close, its headlights glaring in my rearview mirror. I slowed down a bit, hoping they would pass me, but the car stayed right on my bumper. I sped up, and they matched my speed. My heart started to race. This road was narrow, winding, with no room to pull over, and it was getting darker by the second. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were just in a hurry, frustrated that I was going too slow. Maybe they were lost, like me, and didn't want to get left behind on this desolate road. But the longer they followed me, the more uneasy I became. The road twisted and turned through the hills, and every time I glanced in the mirror, those headlights were there, close enough that I could almost see the outline of the driver behind the wheel. But something about the way the car moved didn't feel right. It followed me too perfectly, matching every swerve and turn, as if it knew where I was going before I did. I kept driving, my hands gripping the wheel tighter, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I didn't know where I was anymore. The road had twisted into a maze of dirt paths and unmarked forks, and my GPS had lost signal miles ago. The only thing I knew for certain was that the car was still behind me. By now, it was completely dark. The only light came from my headlights and the two glaring orbs of the car behind me. The trees seemed to close in around the road, their branches scraping against the roof of my car, like skeletal fingers. I tried to speed up, hoping to lose the car, but the road was too narrow and winding. Every time I took a corner too fast, my tires skidded on the loose gravel, and I had to fight to keep the car from sliding off the road. Finally, after what felt like hours, I saw a break in the trees up ahead. It was a small clearing, with an old wooden sign that read, "Maple Hollow Campground." The campground looked abandoned, overgrown weeds, rusted-out picnic tables, and an old, dilapidated cabin. But it was the first sign of civilization I'd seen in hours. Without thinking, I turned into the campground, hoping to lose the car in the trees. But as I pulled into the clearing and killed the engine, I realized my mistake. There was no way out. The only road in or out of the campground was the one I'd just come down, and the car was still behind me, its headlights now cutting through the darkness like searchlights. I sat there, frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. The car stopped at the entrance to the campground, its headlights shining directly on me. For a moment, I thought the driver would get out, but they didn't. They just sat there, watching me. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Me, sitting in my car, too terrified to move, and the other driver, waiting. The silence was unbearable. Even the wind had died down, leaving only the sound of my ragged breathing and the ticking of my car's cooling engine. And then, without warning, the headlights flickered and went out. The car was still there. I could see its dark shape blocking the road, but the lights were off, leaving me in complete darkness. That's when I heard the footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, crunching on the gravel just outside my car. I couldn't see anything. My windows were fogged from the inside, and the darkness outside was impenetrable. But I knew someone was out there. I could feel it. The footsteps stopped right beside my car. For a moment, there was nothing. just silence. And then, something tapped on the window. I screamed, the sound filling the car as I fumbled for the keys. My hands were shaking so badly that I dropped them, the metal clinking against the floor mat. I scrambled to pick them up, my fingers numb with fear. When I finally got the key into the ignition, the engine roared to life. Without thinking, I threw the car into reverse, slamming my foot down on the gas. The tires spun for a moment before catching, and the car lurched backward, the rear bumper slamming into something solid. I didn't care. I put the car in drive and tore out of the campground, not daring to look back. My headlights cut through the darkness as I sped down the narrow road, the branches of the trees slapping against the sides of the car, like hands trying to pull me back. I drove for miles, not caring where I was going, only that I was putting distance between me and whatever was out there. Eventually, the road widened, and I saw the lights of a small town in the distance. I didn't stop until I reached the first gas station, pulling into the brightly lit parking lot and slumping over the steering wheel, my entire body shaking. I sat there for a long time, trying to catch my breath, trying to convince myself that it was over, that I was safe. But even now, 3 years later, I'm not sure I'll ever feel safe again. I don't know who or what was following me that night. I never saw the car again, and when I looked up, Maple Hollow Campground, it didn't exist on any map. I've tried to find it, tried to retrace my route from that night, but every time I drive down Route 23, I get the same uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach, like something is watching me from the trees. I haven't told many people about what happened. Most wouldn't believe me anyway, but I know what I saw, and I know what I heard. There are things out there on the open road, things that can't be explained, and sometimes they find you when you least expect it. I've always considered myself a seasoned driver, someone who's seen it all on the road. I've logged thousands of miles on cross-country trips, driven through snowstorms, navigated pitch-black rural roads, and crossed deserts in the dead of night. But nothing prepared me for what happened that night on Highway 87. It's the kind of road you don't think much about. Just another long stretch of asphalt cutting through the Texas wilderness, far from the hustle and bustle of the big cities. I was driving alone, heading from Dallas to meet some friends for a weekend hiking trip in Arizona. It was early May, and I had left after work to try and beat the weekend rush, planning to drive through the night to make up time. Night driving doesn't bother me. I prefer the quiet, the fewer cars on the road, the absence of distractions. The first few hours of the trip were uneventful. I cruised through the familiar highways, eventually merging onto Highway 87, a less traveled route that runs straight through the heart of rural Texas. It was a long, isolated road, but I liked it that way. It offered the kind of solitude that cleared my mind. I passed small towns with dimly lit gas stations, old motels with flickering neon signs, and vast expanses of flat land that seemed to stretch on forever. The kind of Texas landscape that makes you feel like you're driving through a postcard, except the further you drive, the more you realize just how alone you are. Around midnight, the wind picked up. It wasn't unusual. Springtime in Texas brings gusts that can rattle even the sturdiest vehicles. But these winds felt different, colder than they should have been for a May night. I noticed the temperature gauge on my dashboard drop a few degrees, which was strange considering it had been warm all evening. I adjusted my seat and rolled up the windows, telling myself it was just the open flatlands playing tricks on me. That's when I noticed something out of the ordinary. Up ahead, maybe a quarter mile or so, there were taillights. Nothing unusual about that, except these taillights seemed to appear out of nowhere, blinking into existence as if the car had suddenly materialized on the road. I blinked a few times, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me, but the lights remained. I don't know why it made me uneasy, but it did. There's a certain type of dread that settles in your gut when something doesn't feel right, even if you can't immediately identify why. But I brushed it off. Maybe the car had been driving with its lights off and just turned them on. Or maybe it had been further ahead than I'd realized, and I'd only just now caught sight of it. I didn't speed up. I wasn't in a rush, and I didn't want to tailgate anyone on such a lonely stretch of road. So I kept my distance, maintaining my speed and keeping the car in my sights. As the miles ticked by, though, something strange began to happen. The taillights stayed the same distance ahead of me. No matter how much I adjusted my speed, whether I sped up or slowed down, they remained the exact same distance in front of me. At first, I thought the driver was playing a weird game of cat and mouse, matching my speed to keep a constant distance. But after a while, I realized that wasn't possible. I'd been driving too erratically, changing speeds too frequently. The car couldn't have predicted my every move. And then, after what felt like hours of this strange stalemate, the taillights blinked out. They didn't fade away or turn off like normal brake lights. They just disappeared, as if someone had flipped a switch and erased the car from existence. I slowed down, my heart pounding, scanning the road ahead for any sign of the vehicle. But there was nothing. No car, no lights, just the open highway stretching out into the night. For a few minutes, I convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe I was tired, my eyes playing tricks on me in the darkness. But that didn't explain the cold wind that had persisted, or the growing sense of unease that settled deep in my chest. I kept driving, trying to shake off the feeling, but something in the back of my mind wouldn't let me relax. I couldn't stop thinking about how those lights had vanished, how unnatural it had seemed. I considered pulling over at the next gas station, but I hadn't seen one in miles, and the thought of stopping in the middle of nowhere made my skin crawl. So I kept driving. The landscape grew even more desolate. No more small towns, no more gas stations or motels. Just endless stretches of road, surrounded by fields that seemed to go on forever. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, casting the entire scene in a heavy, oppressive darkness. The only sound was the steady hum of my engine and the occasional gust of wind that rattled my car. And then I saw them again. Taillights. The same distance ahead of me, just as before, as if they'd never disappeared. My stomach lurched. How could that be possible? I'd seen them vanish. I was sure of it. But now they were back, glowing faintly in the distance like some kind of phantom. This time, I sped up. I wanted to get closer, to see if there really was a car, or if I was losing my mind. The road remained straight and empty, no curves or intersections, just a long, unbroken line of asphalt. But as I closed the gap between us, the taillights did something that made my blood run cold. They shifted. It wasn't the smooth, deliberate shift of a car changing lanes. It was sudden, jerky, unnatural. One moment the lights were in front of me, and the next, they were off to the side of the road, hovering over the flat fields, as if the car had left the road entirely and was driving through the air. I slammed on the brakes, my tires screeching against the pavement. My headlights illuminated the empty road ahead, but there was no sign of the car, no indication that anything had been there at all. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, my heart racing. What the hell was happening? I'd heard stories of ghost cars, urban legends about drivers who encountered mysterious vehicles that disappeared into thin air. but I'd always dismissed them as just that, stories. But now, sitting on that dark stretch of highway, with no explanation for what I'd seen, I wasn't so sure. I pulled myself together and started driving again, slower this time. My hands were shaking, my palms slick with sweat. Every shadow on the side of the road seemed to move. Every gust of wind sounded like something whispering just beyond the edge of my headlights. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see those taillights behind me now, but the road remained empty. For the next hour, nothing happened. The wind died down, the road stretched on in eerie silence, and I started to think maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe the long drive, the isolation, had gotten to me. I even considered pulling over and sleeping in the car, just to give my mind a rest. But then I saw the lights again. This time, they weren't in front of me. They were in my rearview mirror. At first, I thought it was another car, someone finally coming up behind me on this lonely road. But as the lights grew brighter, closer, I realized they weren't behaving like normal headlights. They flickered and swayed, like they weren't attached to anything solid. And they were moving too fast, far too fast. Panic surged through me. I pressed down on the accelerator, trying to put distance between myself and whatever was behind me. But the lights kept gaining, growing brighter and brighter until they were blinding. I couldn't see the road anymore, just two orbs of light in my mirror, filling my vision. And then, just as suddenly as they'd appeared, the lights were gone. I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop in the middle of the road. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I looked around, frantically scanning the darkness for any sign of the lights, but there was nothing. Just the empty road stretching out behind me, as if nothing had been there at all. I sat there for a long time, too afraid to move. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened, but there was no explanation. No logical reason for why those lights had appeared, why they'd behaved the way they did. Eventually, I forced myself to keep driving. There was no point in staying there, in the middle of the road, waiting for something to happen. I drove slowly, my eyes darting between the rearview mirror and the road ahead, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white. I didn't see the lights again. By the time I reached the outskirts of a small town, the first hints of dawn were creeping over the horizon. I pulled into the parking lot of a gas station, my entire body trembling with exhaustion and fear. I got out of the car, my legs weak beneath me, and leaned against the hood, trying to steady my breathing. The town was quiet, still asleep in the early morning light. I stood there for a long time, watching the sun rise, grateful to be off that cursed stretch of highway. I never told anyone about what happened on Highway 87. How could I? Who would believe me? Even now, I question whether it was real, whether I really saw what I think I saw. But every time I drive at night, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched, that somewhere out there, those lights are waiting. And I know one thing for sure: I'll never take Highway 87 again. It's funny how a single road can become a part of your identity, a thread woven into the fabric of your life. For me, that road has always been Route 66. I grew up listening to stories about it from my grandparents, who traveled the highway in their youth, chasing dreams and adventure. They spoke of the strange roadside attractions, the diners that served the best pie, and the motels where they shared laughter and love. It was a place where people connected, where memories were made. Little did I know that my own journey on that legendary highway would become a nightmare. In the summer of 2019, I decided to embark on a solo road trip along Route 66. It was my first real adventure since graduating college, and I felt the need to rediscover myself after a few years of feeling lost in a sea of responsibilities and expectations. I packed my old sedan with essentials, snacks, a camera, and a playlist of my favorite songs, and set off from Chicago, eager to hit the open road. The first few days were everything I had hoped for. I drove through quaint towns, stopping to take pictures at the iconic signs, and enjoying the local diners that reminded me of my grandparents' stories. I felt a sense of freedom that I hadn't experienced in years. But as I ventured further into the heart of America, the atmosphere began to shift. By the time I reached the New Mexico border, I had decided to take a detour to visit an old ghost town called Santa Rosa. I had heard tales of its abandoned buildings and eerie stillness, and I wanted to capture the haunting beauty with my camera. The sun was beginning to set as I arrived, casting an orange hue over the landscape that made everything look surreal. The ghost town was everything I expected, and more. I wandered through the dusty streets, exploring the remnants of old shops and houses, snapping photos of the crumbling facades and rusted signs. As the shadows grew longer, an unsettling feeling began to creep in. The air felt heavy, charged with a palpable energy that made the hair on my arms stand on end. I brushed it off as my imagination running wild. After all, ghost towns were meant to be spooky. Just as I was about to leave, I spotted an old gas station at the far end of the town. It looked like it hadn't been touched in decades, the pumps covered in a layer of dust, and the building leaning precariously to one side. My curiosity piqued. I made my way over, excited to take a few more pictures. As I approached, I noticed something odd. There were fresh tire tracks leading into the gas station, despite the overall desolation of the area. I hesitated for a moment, my instincts warning me that I might not be alone. But the thrill of adventure pushed me forward. I walked inside, and the air turned stale, the faint smell of gasoline mixing with the musty scent of decay. It was dimly lit, with only a few rays of light filtering through the grimy windows. I took out my camera and began snapping pictures, trying to capture the eerie beauty of the place. That's when I heard it, a faint sound echoing from the back of the building. It was hard to make out at first, but it sounded like someone whispering. I paused, straining to listen, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispering continued, a soft, indistinct murmur that sent chills down my spine. I called out, half expecting someone to respond, but only silence greeted me. Against my better judgment, I decided to investigate. I cautiously made my way toward the back of the gas station, the whispering growing louder with each step. I rounded a corner and found myself in a small room cluttered with old boxes and broken equipment, but the source of the sound was nowhere to be found. Just as I was about to turn back, I felt it, a cold breeze sweeping through the room, sending shivers down my spine. The temperature dropped dramatically, and I could see my breath forming clouds in the air. Suddenly, the whispering stopped, replaced by an unsettling silence. I felt a rush of panic wash over me, and I turned to leave. As I stepped back into the main area of the gas station, I saw it, a figure standing in the doorway. It was a woman, her features obscured by the shadows, but her long hair hung in disarray around her face. She seemed to be watching me, her eyes reflecting a glint of light that made them appear almost hollow. My heart raced as I instinctively took a step back. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice low and haunting. I was taken aback. I hadn't expected to encounter anyone, let alone someone who looked so out of place. "I was just taking pictures," I replied, my voice shaking slightly. She stepped closer, and I could see her better now. She was dressed in tattered clothing, as if she had stepped out of a time capsule from the 1960s. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her tone a mixture of warning and sorrow. "This place isn't safe." Before I could respond, the atmosphere shifted again. A low rumble echoed from outside, and the lights flickered ominously. The woman's expression darkened, and she glanced nervously toward the door. "You need to leave. Now." I didn't need to be told twice. I turned and bolted for the exit, my heart racing as I pushed through the door and stumbled into the fading light outside. I hopped into my car, fumbling with the keys as I struggled to start the engine. When I finally got the car running, I threw it into gear and sped away from the ghost town, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the woman standing there, but the gas station was now just a shadow in the distance. I drove for what felt like hours, the landscape blurring by as I tried to shake off the feeling of dread that clung to me. I couldn't make sense of what had just happened. Had I imagined the woman? The whispers? As night fell, I pulled into a small roadside motel in a nearby town, desperate for rest. I checked in, my heart still racing from the earlier encounter, and made my way to my room. As I lay in bed, I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, just a figment of my imagination, brought on by fatigue and the spooky atmosphere of the ghost town. But sleep wouldn't come. I tossed and turned, the whispers echoing in my mind, and the image of the woman haunting my thoughts. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me from that gas station, that I had opened a door I couldn't close. The next morning, I decided to cut my trip short. I packed my bags and headed out, determined to put as much distance between myself and that ghost town as possible. As I drove down the highway, the sun rose higher in the sky, but the unease still lingered. Just outside of Amarillo, I stopped for breakfast at a diner. As I sipped my coffee and tried to regroup, I couldn't help but overhear a conversation at a nearby table. A group of travelers were discussing strange occurrences they had experienced while driving along Route 66. One of them mentioned a ghostly woman spotted at an abandoned gas station, warning people to leave. My stomach dropped as I realized they were talking about the same place I had visited. I listened intently as they shared their stories, each one eerier than the last. It seemed I wasn't the only one who had encountered something inexplicable. "People say she was a hitchhiker who vanished long ago," one man said. "Some say she's still looking for a way home, warning travelers to stay away." As they spoke, I felt a chill creep over me, the memories of my own encounter flooding back. I wanted to share my experience, to connect with them, but I held back, not wanting to sound like a lunatic. After breakfast, I hit the road again, determined to make it to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and put the unsettling experience behind me. But as I drove, the whispers returned. They were faint at first, but as the miles rolled by, they grew louder, swirling around me like an unseen storm. Every time I looked in the rearview mirror, I half expected to see the woman's face staring back at me. The paranoia began to seep into my thoughts, making me question every sound, every shadow. Was she truly haunting me, or was it all in my head? By the time I reached Santa Fe, I was exhausted, both physically and mentally. I checked into a hotel, hoping to find some peace. But that night, the whispers returned, echoing through the room as I lay in bed, the shadows stretching ominously across the walls. I finally decided I needed to confront whatever was haunting me. I took out my camera and headed out to the nearby hills, hoping the fresh air and solitude would clear my mind. As I climbed higher, the wind whipped around me, carrying the whispers in a haunting chorus. Suddenly, I stumbled upon an old, abandoned structure, half buried in the earth. It looked like an old chapel, overgrown with weeds and surrounded by a sense of melancholy. I felt drawn to it, as if it were calling my name. I hesitated for a moment, but then pushed the door open, stepping inside. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the light was dim, casting eerie shadows across the walls. I took a few photos, the atmosphere heavy with emotion. As I explored the remnants of the chapel, I felt a presence behind me. I turned around, and there she was, the woman from the gas station, standing at the entrance, her expression one of sorrow and longing. I felt my heart race as I struggled to process what I was seeing. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice a whisper that echoed in the empty space. I don't know," I stammered, the fear gripping me tightly. "I just wanted to take pictures." "You shouldn't have come," she replied, her eyes filled with a sadness that pierced my heart. "You must leave before it's too late." I felt a pull, an urge to flee, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from her. "What happened to you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She sighed, a sound filled with a depth of pain. "I was lost, just like you. I thought I could find my way, but I became trapped in this place. I can't leave. You mustn't suffer the same fate." In that moment, everything clicked into place. The whispers, the gas station, the feelings of dread. It was all connected. The woman was a part of this place, a spirit trapped in a cycle of longing and despair. Before I could respond, a sudden rush of wind swept through the chapel, extinguishing the light. I felt a force pulling me backward, urging me to leave. In a panic, I turned and fled, stumbling into the night, my heart pounding in my chest. I raced down the hill and back to my car, my breath coming in ragged gasps. As I started the engine, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see her again. But there was nothing, only the darkness closing in around me. I drove through the night, determined to leave that part of the world behind. The whispers faded with each mile, replaced by the comforting sounds of the radio and the hum of the tires on the road. In the days that followed, I continued my journey along Route 66, but I could never shake the feeling of that ghostly encounter. I visited several other sites, capturing the beauty of the landscapes and the stories they held, but the memory of the woman lingered like a shadow. As I returned home, I realized that the road had changed me. I had set out in search of adventure, but I found something much deeper, a reminder of the past and the importance of acknowledging those who have come before us. Route 66 will always be a part of my life, but I now understand the stories woven into its fabric, the whispers of the lost, and the journeys of those who seek to find their way. And while I continue to cherish the memories of that legendary highway, I know that I will never forget the warning of the woman in the gas station, forever haunting my thoughts as I travel on. I'll never forget that fateful road trip across the American Southwest. It was the summer of 2021, and I had recently graduated from college. Eager for adventure and tired of being cooped up during the pandemic, I decided to drive from my home in Texas to California, stopping at several national parks along the way. I meticulously planned my route, making sure to include iconic locations like Big Bend, Joshua Tree, and the Grand Canyon. Little did I know that my journey would lead me to a horrifying experience I'd never forget. I set off early one morning in June, the sun barely peeking over the horizon. The early light cast a warm glow over the landscape, and I felt a thrill of excitement. With my car loaded with snacks, a cooler filled with drinks, and my favorite playlists ready to go, I hit the road. The first few days were exhilarating. The vastness of the Texas plains unfolded before me, the open road beckoning me forward. I stopped to take pictures of old gas stations and roadside diners, savoring the sense of freedom. After a couple of days on the road, I made it to Big Bend National Park. The rugged beauty of the desert was breathtaking, with its towering mountains and vibrant sunsets. I hiked during the day, capturing photos of the stunning vistas. And at night, I camped under a blanket of stars. I felt a profound sense of peace, far removed from the stresses of the world. However, as I continued my journey, the peacefulness of the trip began to fade. After leaving Big Bend, I headed toward the small town of Terlingua, known for its ghost town and scenic views. It was there that I first noticed something was off. As I drove into the town, the atmosphere shifted. The air felt heavy, and the streets were oddly quiet. I brushed it off as a simple rural town vibe, but a nagging feeling settled in my gut. I stopped at a small cafe for lunch, where I was greeted by a friendly but peculiar waitress named Linda. As she served me a plate of enchiladas, she casually mentioned the ghost stories surrounding Terlingua. "You should check out the old cemetery," she said with a smirk. "It's haunted, you know. People say they've heard whispers at night." I laughed nervously, trying to lighten the mood, but her eyes held a seriousness that made me uneasy. After finishing my meal, I decided to explore the ghost town. The remnants of old buildings stood as solemn witnesses to a bygone era. I wandered through the ruins, taking pictures and trying to soak in the history of the place. The sun began to set, casting long shadows that danced eerily across the ground. As dusk settled in, I noticed a group of tourists gathered near a crumbling adobe wall, whispering excitedly. Curiosity piqued, I approached them. "Did you hear about the old woman?" one of them asked, his voice low. "They say she wanders these ruins at night, searching for something." The others nodded, their eyes wide with intrigue. I felt a chill run down my spine as they recounted tales of strange encounters. People who claimed to have seen a figure moving among the ruins, a woman in a white dress, her face obscured by shadows. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt an overwhelming urge to leave. The stories were getting to me, and I didn't want to be there after dark. I hurried back to my car, my heart racing, and drove toward my next destination, which was a campground just outside the park. The night was quiet as I set up my tent. The desert air was crisp, and the stars twinkled brightly overhead. I tried to push aside the stories from earlier, convincing myself that they were just legends meant to scare tourists. But as I lay in my tent, listening to the sounds of the desert, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I finally drifted off to sleep, only to be jolted awake a few hours later by an unsettling sound. It was a soft whispering, like voices carried on the wind. I sat up, heart pounding, straining to listen. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was urgent, filled with desperation. My mind raced with thoughts of the stories I'd heard earlier. Could it be true? I forced myself to breathe, trying to rationalize the noise as a figment of my imagination. As I lay there, the whispers grew louder, filling the air with an eerie cadence. I was frozen in place, my mind racing with fear. I thought about the woman in white, the ghost wandering the ruins, searching for something. I grabbed my flashlight, trembling as I unzipped the tent and peered outside. The night was still, the moon casting an otherworldly glow over the desert landscape. But there, just beyond the edge of the campsite, I saw her, a figure dressed in white, standing motionless among the cacti. My breath caught in my throat as I focused the beam of my flashlight on her. She was pale, her hair hanging loosely around her face, obscuring her features. I blinked, convinced I was imagining things. But when I looked again, she was still there, staring directly at me. Fear surged through me. I was paralyzed, caught between the instinct to run and the need to understand what I was seeing. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice shaky. But she didn't respond. Instead, she slowly raised her hand, pointing toward the ground. I followed her gaze, and my blood ran cold. There, at the base of a nearby cactus, lay a weathered, old locket. I felt a strange compulsion to approach it, as if the locket held some significance that I needed to uncover. But the figure remained silent, her expression unreadable. Summoning my courage, I stood up, the whispers fading into the background as I took a cautious step forward. The air felt charged, thick with an energy I couldn't explain. As I reached down to pick up the locket, the woman's figure flickered, like a candle in the wind. I blinked, and she was gone. I fumbled with the locket, feeling its cold metal against my skin. It was old and tarnished, adorned with intricate engravings. As I opened it, my heart sank. Inside was a photograph of a young woman, smiling brightly, and on the opposite side, a faded inscription read, "Forever in my heart, my beloved Clara." Suddenly, I was overwhelmed with a sense of sorrow and longing, as if the weight of the woman's grief had been transferred to me. I realized then that the locket was not just an object. It was a token of love and loss, a connection to a life that had been lost in time. Just then, the whispering returned, but this time it felt different. It was no longer filled with urgency. Instead, it seemed to carry a sense of peace, a bittersweet farewell. The air grew still, and I felt a warm breeze wash over me, as if the spirit of the woman was finally able to rest. I turned back to my campsite, the locket clutched tightly in my hand. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been part of something significant. But as I lay back down in my tent, sleep eluded me once more. The events of the night played over and over in my mind, and I knew I wouldn't be able to stay another night in that place. As dawn broke, I packed up my campsite, the locket still nestled in my pocket. I drove away from Terlingua, the memories of the ghost town and the woman in white lingering in my thoughts. I headed toward California, eager to put the experience behind me, but the whispers followed me, echoing in the back of my mind. Days turned into weeks as I continued my journey along the coast, exploring the beauty of California. But no matter how far I traveled, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The locket weighed heavy in my pocket, a constant reminder of the night I had encountered the spirit of Clara. It wasn't until I returned home that I began to dig deeper into the history of Terlingua. I discovered that Clara was a woman who had lived in the town in the early 1900s. She had fallen in love with a man who had promised to return to her, but he had vanished without a trace. Heartbroken, Clara had spent her days searching the ruins of Terlingua, hoping to find him, until she eventually died of despair. As I learned more about her story, I felt a sense of purpose awakening within me. I decided to return to Terlingua, this time with the intention of honoring Clara's memory. I organized a small gathering with friends, planning to visit the cemetery and the ruins to pay tribute to the lost souls of the town. On the day of our visit, we gathered at the cemetery, where I shared Clara's story with my friends. As we placed flowers on her grave, I felt a wave of calm wash over me. The whispers that had haunted me for weeks faded into the background, replaced by a sense of connection to the past. Afterward, we ventured to the ghost town, exploring the ruins with a newfound appreciation. I felt a sense of closure wash over me, knowing that I had honored Clara's memory. As we walked through the remains of the old gas station, I felt a warmth in the air, a gentle reminder that love endures, even in death. That night, as I lay under the stars in my tent, I finally felt at peace. The whispers had quieted, replaced by a soothing silence. I realized that Clara's spirit was no longer searching for something lost. She had found solace in the love that had once filled her life. My road trip had transformed from a simple adventure into a profound journey of connection and remembrance. And while the memories of that summer would stay with me forever, I knew I had learned an invaluable lesson, that even in the darkest places, love can shine through, guiding us home. It started as an adventure, the kind of trip that gets your heart racing and your mind wandering. After spending 3 long years buried in my studies at college, I decided I deserved a break, an epic road trip across the US. I had spent hours plotting my course on a map, finding hidden gems and roadside attractions along the way. My plan was to head from my home in Michigan, down through the Midwest, across the South, and finally, to the Pacific coast. I could hardly contain my excitement as I loaded up my car, packing enough snacks to last me through the journey. Little did I know, this trip would turn into a nightmare. The first few days were blissful, filled with beautiful landscapes and the open road stretching endlessly before me. I took the scenic route through Indiana, stopping at quirky roadside diners and snapping photos of vintage gas stations. The thrill of exploration was intoxicating, and I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. As I crossed into Kentucky, I decided to detour to visit Mammoth Cave National Park. The sprawling underground caverns were something I had wanted to see for as long as I could remember. After spending the day exploring the caves and marveling at the natural beauty, I settled into a small motel nearby. It was a quaint place, owned by a friendly older couple who had lived there for decades. They told me stories about the area, including local legends that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. One particular story caught my attention, the tale of a ghost that haunted the nearby roads, a woman in white who appeared to travelers in distress. They said she would guide lost souls to safety, but if you ignored her warning, she would lead you to doom. I chuckled nervously, brushing it off as just another urban legend meant to scare tourists. But as I lay in bed that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to the story. The next day, I set off for Nashville, eager to experience the vibrant music scene. I drove along winding roads, surrounded by lush greenery and rolling hills. As I made my way through the countryside, I noticed the skies darkening. A storm was brewing in the distance, and I began to feel uneasy. I pushed forward, hoping to outrun the weather. Just outside of Nashville, the rain began to pour, and visibility dropped drastically. I found myself on a narrow, winding road, flanked by dense woods. I felt a growing sense of unease, the tension in the air thickening with each passing moment. The wind howled through the trees, and my headlights struggled to pierce the darkness. As I navigated the twists and turns, I suddenly saw a figure standing in the middle of the road. My heart raced as I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop just inches away from the figure. It was a woman, drenched from the rain, her long hair clinging to her face. She wore a white dress that billowed around her like mist, and her eyes were wide and filled with fear. I rolled down my window, the storm howling around us. "Are you okay?" I shouted over the noise, panic rising in my chest. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she pointed down the road behind her, her eyes darting nervously. "Please, you have to help me. They're coming." Her voice was barely audible over the rain. I glanced around, confusion flooding my mind. "Who's coming?" "The men in the car," she screamed, her voice trembling. You have to get out of here. My instincts kicked in, and without thinking, I nodded. Okay, get in. I motioned for her to hop in the passenger seat. She climbed in, her clothes soaking the upholstery. I didn't even know if I should trust her, but the desperation in her eyes convinced me. As I started to drive away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. I expected to see headlights behind us, but the road was empty. What are you talking about? I don't see anyone. They were following me, she insisted, glancing nervously out the window. You have to drive fast, please. I pushed down on the gas pedal, the tires screeching as I sped down the road. The rain continued to pour, and the trees loomed ominously on either side of us. I kept looking back, half expecting to see a car appear from the darkness, but there was nothing. Just the endless stretch of wet asphalt. Where are you coming from? I asked, trying to calm my racing heart. What happened? I don't know how to explain it, she said, her voice trembling. I was at a party with some friends. Things got out of hand, and I left. I thought I was safe, but they followed me. I swear they were trying to hurt me. Who? Your friends? I asked, trying to piece together the situation. No, the men in the car. I don't know who they are, but they're dangerous. She clutched her hands tightly in her lap, her knuckles white. As we drove, I noticed her gaze fixated on the forest. She kept glancing back, her anxiety palpable. The rain began to let up, but the tension in the air remained thick. I could sense her fear infecting me, and it was hard to focus on the road ahead. Just breathe, I said, trying to reassure her. You're safe now. I'll get you away from here. But as I said those words, I felt an unsettling presence creeping in. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer. I turned onto a dirt road, hoping to take a shortcut to get us out of the woods. The tires crunched over gravel as I pressed on, the headlights barely illuminating the path ahead. Suddenly, she gasped, her eyes wide with terror. They're here! Turn back! I glanced in the rearview mirror, my heart racing. For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw headlights flickering in the distance. Are you sure? I asked, panic rising in my throat. Yes, please, she begged, her voice rising in urgency. I slammed on the brakes, spinning the wheel to turn the car around. The tires skidded on the wet gravel, and I fought to regain control. My heart pounded as I faced the direction we had come from, the darkness pressing in around us. As I turned, I saw headlights approaching from behind, illuminating the trees. A sense of dread washed over me. I hit the gas again, desperate to escape whatever was pursuing us. Drive faster, she urged, her voice frantic. I pressed down harder on the accelerator, the engine roaring as I pushed the car to its limits. The headlights grew closer, the shadows shifting ominously behind us. I could see the outline of a vehicle gaining on us, its lights bright against the darkness. Keep going! Don't stop! She screamed. I fought the panic rising in my chest, adrenaline fueling my movements. The car was picking up speed, but the headlights were relentless, closing in on us. My heart raced as I veered off the dirt road and back onto the main highway, hoping for safety. As we burst back onto the asphalt, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The headlights were still there, but they were no longer behind us. They had disappeared, swallowed by the darkness. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been chasing us, something unseen, but deeply unsettling. Where are they? I asked, my voice trembling. I don't know, she said, her face pale. Just keep driving. I pressed the accelerator, willing the car to go faster, even though my heart was pounding with fear. The road stretched out before us, illuminated by my headlights. I kept glancing around, waiting for something to emerge from the shadows. As we drove in silence, I could feel the tension in the air. She kept looking over her shoulder, scanning the darkness for signs of danger. I could see fear etched into her features, and it was starting to seep into my bones. After a few minutes of driving in silence, I took a deep breath and tried to break the tension. "What's your name?" I asked, hoping to ground us both in reality. "Jessica," she replied, her voice still shaky. "Thank you for helping me." "Of course, Jessica," I said, trying to keep my tone calm. "What kind of party were you at?" "A friend's house," she said, glancing nervously out the window. "We were just hanging out, but things got weird. Some guys showed up who weren't supposed to be there. They started acting strange, and I got scared. That's when I left." "Did you know them?" I asked, trying to piece together the situation. "No, I've never seen them before," she replied, her voice rising in panic. "They just came out of nowhere." As we drove, I caught sight of a gas station in the distance. "Let's stop there," I suggested. "We can call the police and figure out what to do next." Her eyes widened. "No, we can't stop. They'll find us." I hesitated, torn between her fear and my need for safety. "Jessica, we need help. We can't just keep driving." She shook her head vehemently. "Please, just keep going. We can't stop." Against my better judgment, I continued driving, my mind racing with concern. The darkness enveloped us, and I could feel the weight of her fear pressing down on me. The road felt endless, each turn bringing uncertainty. We drove for what felt like an eternity, the tension hanging in the air like a storm cloud. I could see her glancing around nervously, her eyes darting from the window to the rearview mirror. I was beginning to wonder if we would ever find a safe place to stop. Finally, after what felt like hours, we came across a small town. I could see lights glowing in the distance, and my heart lifted with the promise of safety. "Look, there's a town ahead. We can stop there," I said, trying to inject some hope into the situation. "No, it's not safe," she screamed, panic rising in her voice. "We have to keep driving." I felt a surge of frustration. "Jessica, we can't just keep running. We need to figure this out." But she was too terrified to listen. "Please just drive." I pressed on, my mind racing with confusion and fear. The town faded behind us, swallowed by the darkness once again. I glanced at her, her face pale and drawn, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. Finally, I saw a small diner up ahead, the neon sign flickering in the darkness. "We can stop there," I insisted, my voice firm. "It'll be okay. I promise." Her eyes widened in fear, but I didn't give her a chance to protest. I pulled into the parking lot, the tires crunching on gravel. The diner was small and unassuming, but it was a beacon of light in the darkness. We stepped inside, the warmth of the diner wrapping around us like a comforting blanket. The smell of coffee and fried food filled the air, and I felt a rush of relief. I approached the counter, where an elderly woman stood wiping down the surface. "Can we use your phone? We need to call the police," I said, my voice urgent. She nodded, her expression kind. "Of course, dear. Just be careful out there." I picked up the phone, my hands trembling as I dialed 911. "We need help," I said, my voice shaking. "There's been a woman who was attacked. We're being followed." As I spoke to the operator, I glanced over at Jessica. She was standing near the window, her eyes wide with fear. I could see her shaking, and it broke my heart to watch her struggle. The operator reassured me that help was on the way, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still in danger. I hung up the phone and turned back to Jessica. "Help is coming," I said, trying to soothe her. But before I could finish my sentence, I saw her face drain of color. "They're here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. My heart dropped as I turned to look outside. There, parked just across the street, was a dark SUV with tinted windows. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that the headlights were turned off, the vehicle lurking in the shadows. "Jessica, we need to get out of here," I said, my voice shaking with fear. But before I could move, the door to the diner burst open, and a man rushed in. He was disheveled and wild-eyed, his clothes stained and torn. "Help me!" he shouted, collapsing onto the floor. The elderly woman behind the counter rushed to his side, but I felt a wave of dread wash over me. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "They're coming," he gasped, his breathing ragged. "They won't stop." The diner fell silent, and I could feel the tension thickening in the air. I glanced back at Jessica, whose eyes were wide with terror. "We have to go," I whispered. But before we could make a move, the door slammed open again, and two men stepped inside, their faces obscured by shadows. My heart raced as I recognized them from Jessica's earlier description. They were the same men she had been afraid of. The atmosphere shifted, and I could feel the air grow heavy with danger. I grabbed Jessica's hand, pulling her toward the back exit. "We need to get out of here, now." We burst through the back door and into the alley behind the diner, our footsteps echoing in the stillness. I could hear the men shouting behind us, their voices filled with anger and desperation. We sprinted down the alley, adrenaline pumping through our veins. As we turned a corner, I spotted a row of parked cars. I didn't care whose they were. I just needed to get us to safety. "Get in!" I yelled, pushing her toward the nearest car. I yanked on the door handle, but it was locked. Frantically, I glanced around for another vehicle. The shouts of the men grew closer, and panic surged through me. Finally, I spotted a car with its door slightly ajar. "Over here!" I shouted, pulling her toward it. We jumped into the car, and I quickly fumbled with the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I slammed the gear into drive, peeling out of the parking lot, just as the men reached the alley. I drove like a bat out of hell, weaving through the streets as my heart raced. I could feel Jessica's eyes on me, a mix of fear and gratitude. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We need to find a police station," I replied, my grip tight on the wheel. "They can help us." We drove for what felt like an eternity, the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. I finally spotted a police station up ahead and pulled into the parking lot. We rushed inside, gasping for breath. The officers on duty quickly took our statements, and I could see concern etched on their faces. They assured us they would take care of the situation, and within minutes, they were out the door, heading toward the diner. As we waited, I looked over at Jessica. "Are you okay?" I asked, my heart aching for her. She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm just so scared," she said. "Thank you for helping me." I reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "You're safe now. They can't hurt you anymore." Eventually, the officers returned, and I could see the grim expressions on their faces. "We've got the situation under control," one of them said. "You two can rest easy." I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but the fear still lingered. I turned to Jessica, who looked exhausted. "Do you have somewhere to go?" I asked gently. She shook her head. "I don't know what to do now." "Why don't you stay with me?" I suggested. "I can help you find a safe place." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you. I'd really appreciate that." As the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that our ordeal wasn't over. I had saved Jessica from whatever had been chasing her, but the lingering dread remained. As I drove her to my motel, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see shadows lurking behind us. When we finally arrived at the motel, I helped her check in and made sure she felt safe. We talked late into the night, sharing our stories and fears, and I could see the weight beginning to lift from her shoulders. Eventually, exhaustion overtook us, and we fell asleep. But even in the quiet of the night, I could hear the echoes of fear lingering in the air. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of rain pattering against the window. I got out of bed, feeling restless, and decided to check on Jessica. As I knocked on her door, I felt a sudden wave of anxiety wash over me. "Jessica," I called softly, "are you okay?" There was no answer. I knocked again, harder this time, panic rising in my chest. "Jessica!" I shouted, my voice rising in urgency. I tried the handle, but it was locked. My heart raced as I banged on the door. "Jessica, open up!" Finally, I heard movement inside. She opened the door, her face pale and drawn. "What's wrong?" she asked, looking terrified. I could see the fear in her eyes, and it sent chills down my spine. "I just wanted to check on you. Are you all right?" She nodded slowly, but her gaze drifted past me, looking out into the parking lot. "I just had the strangest dream," she said, her voice trembling. "What was it about?" I asked, feeling a sense of foreboding. "There were men. They were looking for me. I felt like they were right outside," she replied, her eyes wide with fear. I felt a chill run down my spine. "We should leave this place," I said, urgency creeping into my voice. "I don't want to take any chances." We quickly packed our things, and as we left the motel, I could feel a sense of unease hanging in the air. I glanced around, scanning the parking lot for any sign of danger. As we drove away, I felt a mix of relief and anxiety. We were free, but the shadows of our experience loomed large in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still being watched, still being hunted. We decided to head toward the nearest town, hoping to find a place where we could regroup and plan our next steps. The rain continued to fall as we drove, the gray skies reflecting our sense of unease. As we entered the small town, I spotted a diner and pulled into the parking lot. We needed food and a moment to breathe. As we entered, the familiar smell of coffee and bacon filled the air. I looked around, scanning the faces of the patrons, hoping to find some semblance of safety. We found a booth in the corner and ordered some breakfast. As we sat, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching us. I looked around, and my heart sank as I spotted a man in a dark jacket sitting alone at the counter, his eyes locked on us. "Jessica," I whispered, leaning closer. "That guy is staring at us." She turned to look, her eyes widening in fear. "What do we do?" "Just act normal," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "We'll finish eating and then leave." But the man didn't break his gaze. I felt a knot tightening in my stomach, and I struggled to keep calm. We finished our meals quickly, paying the bill with trembling hands. As we stood to leave, I caught a glimpse of the man standing up, his eyes still fixed on us. "Let's go," I said, my heart racing. We hurried out the door, glancing over our shoulders as we made our way to the car. As I fumbled with the keys, I heard footsteps behind us. I spun around, and to my horror, I saw the man from the diner walking toward us, his expression dark and menacing. "Get in the car," I shouted, urgency flooding my voice. We jumped into the vehicle, and I started the engine, my heart pounding in my chest. I glanced in the rearview mirror as we pulled away, my breath hitching as I saw him standing in the parking lot, watching us drive away. I didn't know who he was or what he wanted, but I felt a surge of fear as we left the diner behind. "What was that about?" Jessica asked, her voice trembling. "I have no idea," I replied, trying to calm my racing heart. "But I don't want to stick around to find out." We continued driving, the weight of our experience settling heavily on our shoulders. We needed to find a safe place, somewhere we could regroup and figure out our next steps. Eventually, we decided to head toward a larger city where we could find more resources. As we drove, I could feel the tension in the air, a palpable sense of fear that was hard to shake. When we arrived in the city, we found a hotel and checked in. As we settled into our room, I could see Jessica was on edge. "What if they find us?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I reached out and squeezed her hand, trying to reassure her. "We'll be safe here. We'll figure this out together." But the feeling of dread lingered, haunting us both. We spent the next few days trying to keep a low profile, avoiding crowded places and staying close to the hotel. We filed a police report and explained everything that had happened, but they couldn't provide us with any concrete answers. They assured us they would investigate, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still being watched. As the days passed, our fear began to turn into paranoia. Every time we stepped outside, I felt eyes on us, shadows lurking just out of sight. I started to dread the thought of leaving the hotel, but we couldn't hide forever. One night, as we sat in our hotel room, Jessica received a phone call. It was a number she didn't recognize. "What should I do?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Don't answer it," I said, my heart racing. "It could be them." She hesitated, glancing at the phone. "But what if it's someone else?" "Just let it go to voicemail," I insisted, anxiety clawing at my chest. But as the minutes passed, the call continued to ring. Jessica bit her lip, and I could see her fear growing. "What if it's important?" she whispered. Finally, after several rings, it stopped. She looked at me, her eyes wide. "What if they leave a message?" "Let's just wait," I said, my stomach churning. "We can listen to it later." But I could feel the tension mounting between us. The atmosphere in the room felt heavy, and I knew we were both on edge. After a while, she couldn't take it anymore. "I'm going to check the voicemail," she said, her voice trembling. I nodded, my heart racing as she dialed the number. The phone rang, and a moment later, the voicemail picked up. We held our breath, waiting to hear what would come next. A deep voice echoed through the speaker. "Jessica, I know you're there. We're coming for you. You can't hide forever." My blood ran cold as fear gripped me. I turned to Jessica, whose face had gone pale. "We have to leave. Now," I said urgently. Without waiting for a response, I grabbed our bags and we rushed out of the hotel. The feeling of dread intensified as we hurried to the car, the night air thick with tension. I could hear our hearts pounding in our chests as we drove away, unsure of where we were headed. We were running, but I didn't know if it would be enough. Days turned into weeks as we tried to evade whoever was after us. We moved from town to town, staying in different motels and avoiding contact with anyone. But the feeling of being hunted never left us. One night, as we were settling into yet another hotel room, I heard a knock on the door. My heart dropped, and I exchanged a worried glance with Jessica. "Who is it?" I called, my voice trembling. "It's the police," came a voice from the other side. Cautiously, I opened the door, and a uniformed officer stood there, concern etched on his face. "We need to talk to you both. It's urgent." I stepped aside, letting him in as my heart raced. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to mask my fear. The officer glanced at Jessica, then back at me. There's been a report of a gang operating in this area, and they're known to target young women. We think they may be connected to what's been happening to you." I felt a cold wave wash over me. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "They've been tracking your movements," he explained. "We believe they've been looking for Jessica specifically. You both need to stay with us for your safety." I looked at Jessica, and I could see the fear in her eyes. "What do we do?" she whispered. "We'll take you to a safe location," the officer replied. "But you need to trust us." With a sinking feeling, I nodded. We had no choice but to accept their help. They led us to a police station where we could stay while they investigated further. I felt a mix of relief and fear as we settled into a small room. At least we were safe for now. The next few days were a blur of activity as the police worked tirelessly to gather information. They reassured us that they were doing everything they could to protect us. But the feeling of unease never left. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we received word that they had apprehended several members of the gang. Jessica and I were called in to give our statements, and I felt a sense of hope beginning to blossom. As the officers explained what they had found, I realized we might finally be free from the fear that had haunted us for so long. But the memories of our harrowing journey lingered, haunting my thoughts, even as I tried to push them away. After the investigation wrapped up, Jessica and I decided to leave the area for good. We had been through too much, and I wanted to start fresh, far away from the shadows of our past. We made plans to head back to Michigan together, a journey that felt bittersweet. As we drove, I couldn't help but reflect on everything we had been through. It felt surreal, as if it had all been a terrible nightmare. When we finally reached my hometown, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. We had made it home, and I was determined to leave the past behind. Though the experience had changed us, I knew we would emerge stronger on the other side. As I looked over at Jessica, I could see the spark of hope beginning to return to her eyes. We both understood that healing would take time, but we were no longer alone. We had each other, and together, we could face whatever lay ahead. The long road home had tested us in ways we never expected, but it had also forged a bond between us that would last a lifetime. And as we pulled into my driveway, I took a deep breath, ready to embrace whatever came next, knowing that we had survived. It was a late October evening in 2015, the kind of night that makes your breath visible in the chilly air. I had decided to take a solo road trip from Los Angeles to San Francisco, a journey I had made several times before. There was something about the open road that called to me. The freedom of it was intoxicating. I planned to take my time, stop at a few scenic viewpoints, and maybe even capture some photos for my travel blog. Little did I know, this trip would turn into one of the most harrowing experiences of my life. I left Los Angeles around noon, the sun shining bright and the air crisp. The first part of the drive was uneventful, just the smooth hum of my car and the familiar sights of the California countryside. I stopped for lunch at a roadside diner, a quaint little place that looked like it hadn't changed since the 1960s. The locals were friendly, and the food was comfortingly greasy. I left feeling energized, eager to hit the road again. As the sun began to dip in the sky, I reached the more rugged part of Highway 1, known for its breathtaking coastal views. The road twisted and turned, hugging the cliffs above the Pacific Ocean. I stopped frequently to take in the vistas, snapping pictures of the waves crashing against the rocks below. The sky was painted with hues of orange and pink as the sun set, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. As darkness fell, I knew I had to find a place to stay for the night. I had planned to reach San Francisco by evening, But with all my stops, I was running late. I checked my phone for nearby motels, and fortunately, I found a small one just off the highway in a town called Big Sur. It looked quaint and rustic, nestled among the trees, so I decided to give it a shot. Arriving at the motel, I was greeted by a friendly elderly woman at the front desk. She had a warm smile and offered me a cup of coffee while she checked me in. The motel was small, with only a handful of rooms, but it felt cozy enough. She handed me the key to my room and mentioned that the Wi-Fi was spotty due to the location, but I didn't mind. I was looking forward to a digital detox. I settled into my room, unpacking a few things and deciding to take a quick shower. As I let the hot water wash over me, I felt the fatigue of the day slip away. After getting dressed, I decided to explore the motel grounds a bit before turning in for the night. The air was crisp and the stars were bright against the dark sky. I took a stroll around the small property, admiring the towering trees and the distant sound of the ocean waves crashing against the shore. As I walked, I noticed something strange. A faint light flickering in the distance, off the path that led to the beach. My curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to check it out. I carefully made my way down the path, trying not to trip over the uneven ground. The light grew brighter as I approached, and soon I could see that it was a fire, surrounded by a few people. They seemed to be gathered for some kind of gathering, perhaps a bonfire. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I should join them or keep my distance. But as I stepped closer, I realized that they weren't just having a casual get-together. The atmosphere felt oddly tense. They were whispering to one another, their faces shadowed in the flickering light. I could hear snippets of their conversation, a lot of talk about the woods and "they are watching." My gut instinct told me that this was not a group I wanted to involve myself with. I quietly backed away, deciding it was best to retreat to my room. I made my way back along the path, feeling a shiver run down my spine as I glanced over my shoulder. The flickering light grew dimmer until it was just a distant glow, but the eerie feeling lingered. Back in my room, I locked the door and turned on the TV, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling from the bonfire. I flipped through the channels but found nothing interesting. Eventually, I decided to just call it a night. I crawled into bed, hoping that the comfort of sleep would erase the unease I felt. Around 2 a.m., I was jolted awake by a strange noise outside my window. It sounded like muffled voices, low and indistinct, mixed with the rustling of leaves. I sat up in bed, straining to listen. The voices seemed to come and go, like a whispering wind. Curiosity got the better of me again, and I swung my legs over the side of the bed, creeping toward the window. I peered through the curtains, but the darkness made it impossible to see anything. I could still hear the voices, but they were now accompanied by something else. Footsteps. My heart began to race. I backed away from the window and grabbed my phone, contemplating whether to call for help. But deep down, I felt foolish. Perhaps it was just some late-night revelers. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to convince myself to calm down. Suddenly, there was a loud knock on my door. I jumped, adrenaline flooding my veins. "Hello?" A deep voice called from the other side. "We need to talk to you." Panic surged through me. I glanced at the clock. It was still the middle of the night. "Who is it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's the police," the voice said. "Open up." The fear gripped me tighter. Why would the police be at my door at this hour? I hesitated, then took a deep breath and opened the door a crack. A tall man in a police uniform stood there, flanked by another officer. They looked serious, and I felt my heart racing even faster. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "We're investigating some reports of suspicious activity in the area," the officer explained. "Have you seen anything unusual tonight?" I thought back to the bonfire and the eerie group I had encountered. Should I tell them? Would it put me in danger? Instead, I opted for a more generalized response. "I heard some voices outside, but I didn't see anything." The officers exchanged a glance, and I could feel the tension in the air. "You should stay inside and lock your doors," the first officer said. "We're patrolling the area, but it's best to be cautious." "Thank you," I replied, closing the door as they turned to leave. I locked it tightly and sat on the edge of the bed again, my mind racing. I felt like a character in a horror movie, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. I tried to distract myself by scrolling through my phone, but the weight of anxiety was too heavy. I finally decided to turn off the lights and try to sleep again, hoping that the morning would bring clarity. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through the window, the peaceful sounds of birds chirping outside. I felt a sense of relief wash over me as I got out of bed and stretched. The previous night's events felt surreal, like a bad dream. I decided to put it all behind me and enjoy my day. After checking out of the motel, I continued my drive up the coast. The views were stunning, the ocean sparkling in the morning sun. I stopped at a few picturesque spots, enjoying the beauty of California's coastline. It felt good to be back on the road, leaving behind the tension of the previous night. But as I drove further north, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, seeing the same dark sedan trailing behind me. At first, I thought it was just paranoia, a side effect of the stress from the night before. But as the miles rolled on, the feeling intensified. I decided to pull over at a rest area, hoping to shake off the feeling. I stepped out of my car, taking a deep breath of the fresh ocean air. I noticed the dark sedan had also pulled in and parked a few spots away. A knot tightened in my stomach. I walked to the restroom, trying to act casual, but I could feel the weight of someone's gaze on me. As I washed my hands, I caught a glimpse of the reflection in the mirror and saw a man in a hoodie standing outside, leaning against the wall. He was watching me, and my heart dropped. I hurried out of the restroom, my instincts screaming that I needed to get away. I rushed back to my car, fumbling with the keys as I tried to keep calm. I quickly got in, locked the doors, and started the engine. The dark sedan was still there, and I could see the man getting into the passenger side. I pulled out of the rest area and back onto the highway, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I glanced in my rearview mirror, and to my horror, the dark sedan was right behind me, tailing me closely. My mind raced as I tried to think of what to do. I took a few sharp turns, trying to shake them off, but they stayed right on my tail. I could feel panic rising in my chest, and I realized I needed to get help. I spotted a gas station up ahead and made a sharp turn into the parking lot, praying they wouldn't follow me. I parked and dashed inside, my heart pounding in my ears. The cashier looked up, startled, as I rushed to the counter. "Please call the police," I gasped. "I think I'm being followed." The cashier quickly grabbed the phone and dialed, while I peered out the window, scanning the parking lot for the dark sedan. My heart sank as I saw it pull into the gas station and stop, the driver and passenger both getting out and looking around. The police arrived just moments later, sirens blaring. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but it was mixed with fear. The officers approached me, asking what had happened, and I explained everything in a rush. They nodded, their expressions serious, as they turned their attention to the men in the dark sedan. As the officers approached the two men, I felt a mix of fear and anticipation. My heart raced as I watched them exchange words. I couldn't hear the conversation, but the tension in the air was palpable. After a few minutes, the officers returned to me. "They're just two guys traveling. They say they were just stopping for gas," one of the officers said. "But we'll keep an eye on them for you." I nodded, though I felt a knot in my stomach. I wanted to believe the officers, but the encounter from the night before lingered in my mind. I thanked them, and feeling shaken but somewhat relieved, decided to continue my journey. I got back in my car and hit the road, trying to shake off the anxiety. The sun was shining, and the scenery was beautiful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I drove for hours, taking breaks whenever I could to stretch my legs and breathe deeply. As I approached San Francisco, the traffic began to thicken. I merged onto the freeway, and that's when I spotted the dark sedan again, lingering a few cars behind me. My heart sank, panic creeping back in. I changed lanes, weaving through traffic, trying to create some distance. But the sedan kept pace, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I had to find a way to lose them once and for all. I spotted an exit up ahead for a busy shopping center and made a split-second decision to take it. I turned sharply, heart pounding, praying they wouldn't follow. I sped into the parking lot, weaving between cars, and finally coming to a stop behind a large department store. I sat in my car, breathless and terrified, waiting to see if they would follow. After a few moments, I cautiously peered out of my window. I couldn't see the dark sedan anywhere, and for a moment, I felt a glimmer of hope. I decided to get out of my car, making my way toward the entrance of the store. I needed to find a place where I felt safe. As I walked through the parking lot, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a message from a friend, checking in on me. I quickly replied, explaining my situation and my fears. Just as I reached the entrance, I heard a familiar sound, a car engine revving. My heart dropped as I turned to see the dark sedan pull into the parking lot. My breath caught in my throat as the two men got out and began to scan the area. I ducked inside the store, feeling the panic swell in my chest. I hurried to the back, trying to blend in with the shoppers. My heart raced as I moved through the aisles, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds. "Excuse me, miss?" A voice interrupted my thoughts. I turned to see a store employee looking at me with concern. "Are you okay? You seem a bit flustered." I quickly explained my situation, and his eyes widened with alarm. "You should stay in the store. I'll get security," he said, hurrying away. Moments later, I found myself surrounded by security personnel who escorted me to a safe room at the back of the store. They assured me that they would keep an eye on the parking lot and called the police once again. I sat in that room, trembling as I waited for help to arrive. The minutes felt like hours as my mind raced with fear. I couldn't shake the feeling that those men were dangerous, that they had been watching me all along. When the police finally arrived, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. They took my statement again and assured me that they would check the parking lot and surrounding areas. After a thorough search, they found the dark sedan parked a few rows over, empty. They checked the license plates and confirmed that the vehicle had no reported issues. The officers told me that the men had likely moved on, but they would remain vigilant in the area. Once the situation was under control, I was allowed to leave the store. As I stepped back outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting a golden hue over everything. I took a deep breath, grateful to be outside, but still shaken by the events of the day. As I drove into San Francisco, the vibrant city filled with lights and energy, I felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. I had made it to my destination, but the lingering fear from my experiences weighed heavily on me. I decided to stay in a hotel downtown, far away from the dark memories of the previous night. After checking in, I finally allowed myself to relax, sinking into the plush comfort of the hotel bed. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of seagulls outside my window, the sun shining brightly. I took a deep breath, determined to enjoy my time in the city, despite the fears that had shadowed me on my journey. As I explored the streets of San Francisco, I tried to focus on the beauty around me: the iconic Golden Gate Bridge, the colorful houses of Haight-Ashbury, and the bustling Fisherman's Wharf. Each moment felt like a step toward reclaiming my sense of safety and freedom. But even in the midst of the vibrant city, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I caught a glimpse of someone in the crowd, my heart would race, and I'd feel a shiver run down my spine. I didn't know if it was just my imagination, but the fear had become a part of me. I spent a few days in San Francisco, trying to immerse myself in the city's culture and charm, but the experience had changed me. I was more cautious, more aware of my surroundings. The road trip that was supposed to be an adventure had turned into a nightmare. As I prepared to head back home, I reflected on the journey. It had started with excitement and wonder, but it had quickly spiraled into fear and uncertainty. I had faced the darkness that lurked just beyond the edges of the light, and while I had made it through, the scars of the experience would linger. Driving back to Los Angeles, I felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. The sun was shining, and the road stretched out before me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the past would always be a part of me. I had survived, but the memory of that dark sedan and the fear it brought would haunt me for years to come. And as I returned home, I knew that the world was not as safe as I had once believed. The road held many dangers, some unseen and unexpected, but I also knew that I was stronger now, that I could face whatever came next, even if it meant keeping one eye on the shadows. In the summer of 2019, I embarked on what I thought would be a carefree road trip from San Francisco to New Orleans. I was eager to escape my mundane life and embrace the open road, the music of my favorite bands filling the air as I cruised through picturesque landscapes. Little did I know that this journey would take a dark turn, leaving an indelible mark on my life. I packed my car with essentials, including snacks, a cooler full of drinks, and my beloved travel journal to document the adventure. After bidding farewell to friends and family, I set off with a sense of excitement and freedom, my heart racing with anticipation. The first leg of the trip was blissful. I drove through California's rolling hills, enjoying the golden landscapes under the warm sun. I stopped frequently to take pictures, capturing the beauty of the vineyards and the mountains that surrounded me. By the time I reached the Nevada border, I felt exhilarated. I was finally living my dream. However, as I continued my journey, I couldn't shake the feeling of loneliness that began to creep in. I was on the road for hours, and the vastness of the desert made me feel small and isolated. The gas stations grew more infrequent, and soon I found myself in a desolate stretch of Highway 29, surrounded by nothing but sand and scrub brush. I had planned to stay overnight in a small town called Eerie, Nevada, but as night fell, I realized I wouldn't make it before dark. I decided to pull over at a rest area, a seemingly abandoned place where a couple of trucks were parked. I figured it would be a good opportunity to stretch my legs and grab a snack. As I stepped out of the car, the chill of the desert night air hit me. I walked over to a picnic table and took a seat, taking in the silence around me. The moon hung high in the sky, casting an eerie glow on the landscape. It was beautiful in its own way, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I shrugged off the feeling, convinced it was just my imagination running wild. I pulled out my phone to check for service, but I was in a dead zone. With no signal, I sat there, the only sounds the rustling of leaves and the occasional howl of the wind. As I munched on my snacks, I noticed headlights in the distance. A car was approaching the rest area. Relief washed over me as I thought about the company. The car pulled in and parked a few spaces away. A man got out, tall and lean, wearing a dark hoodie. He glanced around, then started walking towards me. "Hey there," he called out, his voice friendly enough. "You mind if I join you?" I hesitated for a moment. There was something about him that felt off, but I didn't want to be rude. "Sure," I replied, trying to sound casual. He sat down across from me, and we exchanged pleasantries. His name was Jake, and he was traveling across the country for a job. As we chatted, I tried to focus on the conversation, but my instincts were on high alert. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Jake asked if I was traveling alone, and I told him I was. His eyes seemed to narrow slightly, and a strange smile spread across his face. "That's brave," he said, his tone shifting. "You know, it's not safe to be out here alone at night." I laughed nervously, brushing off his comment. "I'll be fine. Just a quick stop before I continue on my way." The atmosphere became tense, and I felt an instinctual need to get back to my car. "Well, I should get going soon," I said, trying to sound casual. "Sure," Jake replied, but he didn't move. "But don't you want to hear a story?" I frowned, unsure of what to say. "I'm not really in the mood for stories." He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming in the moonlight. "This one's about a girl who traveled alone just like you. She pulled over at a rest area, and when she got back to her car, she found something, or someone, waiting for her." My heart raced as he spoke. I forced a laugh, trying to play it off. "That's just a story." But Jake continued, his voice low and conspiratorial. "They say that girl vanished without a trace. No one knows what happened to her. Some say she's still out there, wandering these highways, looking for someone to keep her company." I glanced around, suddenly feeling very exposed. The darkness seemed to close in around us. "I really should be going," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why don't you let me walk with you to your car?" Jake suggested, standing up slowly. "It's not safe to be alone out here." I shook my head, a surge of fear rushing through me. "No, it's fine. I can manage." He stepped closer, his demeanor shifting from friendly to something more sinister. "You really should let me help you. You don't want to end up like that girl, do you?" Panic surged through me as I turned and hurried towards my car. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking as I tried to unlock the door. I could feel Jake's presence behind me, and I knew I had to act quickly. Just as I managed to get the door open, I heard him call out, "Wait, I just wanted to talk." I slid into the driver's seat and locked the door, my heart pounding in my chest. "I'm leaving," I shouted, trying to keep my voice steady. Jake stepped back, his expression shifting to anger. "You think you can just leave? You think you're safe out here?" With my heart racing, I started the engine and backed out of the parking space. I glanced in my rearview mirror, and to my horror, I saw Jake getting into his car. He followed me as I sped away from the rest area. My mind raced as I drove down the dark highway, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I took several turns trying to lose him, but he stayed right on my tail. The road was desolate, with no other cars in sight, and the darkness enveloped me. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare. I had no cell service and no way to call for help. I could only focus on the road ahead and the headlights glaring behind me. Suddenly, I spotted a flickering light in the distance. It was a small diner, and I hoped it was open. I accelerated towards it, praying for safety. I pulled into the parking lot, my heart racing as I parked the car and rushed inside. The diner was nearly empty, with only a few patrons scattered at the counter. I quickly approached the cashier, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes. "Please, I need help," I said, my voice trembling. "There's a man following me." She looked concerned and nodded. "Take a seat, honey. I'll call the sheriff." I turned to look out the window, and my stomach sank as I saw Jake's car pull into the parking lot. He parked and got out, casually walking towards the diner. I quickly ducked behind a booth, my heart pounding as I held my breath. The diner doors swung open, and I caught a glimpse of him as he entered. I could feel the tension in the air as he scanned the room, searching for me. My heart raced, and I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping he wouldn't find me. I heard the sound of footsteps approaching, and I knew he was getting closer. Suddenly, the sheriff burst through the door, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. "Can I help you?" the sheriff asked, his voice booming. Jake turned, his face shifting from surprise to annoyance. "I was just looking for someone," he said, feigning innocence. The sheriff narrowed his eyes, stepping closer. "And who would that be?" Before Jake could respond, the cashier chimed in. "This girl says he's been following her." The sheriff looked at me, then back at Jake. "You need to leave, or I'll have to arrest you." Jake's demeanor changed in an instant. "You can't do that. I haven't done anything wrong," he protested, his voice rising. The sheriff stepped in front of me, his presence calming. "I suggest you get in your car and drive away. If I see you around here again, I won't be so lenient." Jake glared at me, a dangerous glint in his eyes, before turning and storming out of the diner. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding, feeling an overwhelming sense of relief wash over me. The sheriff stayed with me for a few more minutes, assuring me that I was safe. "You did the right thing by coming here," he said. "Just stay alert and don't travel alone at night if you can help it." After he left, I sat at the diner counter, ordering a coffee and trying to calm my nerves. The adrenaline began to wear off, leaving me feeling exhausted. I took a moment to collect my thoughts and reassure myself that I was safe. Once I finished my coffee, I knew I had to continue my journey. I decided to take the highway directly to Las Vegas, a bustling city that felt like a safer option. The diner staff wished me well as I left, their kindness a comforting reminder that not everyone in the world was dangerous. The drive to Las Vegas felt endless, my mind still racing with what had happened. I stayed alert, frequently glancing in my rearview mirror, ensuring I wasn't being followed. Thankfully, the road was mostly clear, and as dawn broke, the sunlight cast away the darkness that had haunted me the night before. Arriving in Las Vegas felt like stepping into another world. The bright lights and bustling energy were a stark contrast to the isolation I had experienced on the highway. I checked into a hotel, grateful for a warm bed and a sense of security. After a quick shower and a change of clothes, I decided to explore the Strip, hoping to shake off the lingering fear. The crowds were invigorating, and I lost myself in the sights and sounds of the city. I reveled in the excitement, but the memory of Jake and the rest area still lingered in the back of my mind. As the sun began to set, I found myself drawn to a small casino off the main strip. I felt the thrill of the game as I sat at a slot machine, trying to distract myself from my thoughts. I started to relax, feeling the warmth of the city envelop me. But just as I was beginning to enjoy myself, I noticed a familiar figure out of the corner of my eye. My heart sank as I turned to see Jake standing at the entrance, scanning the crowd. Panic surged through me as I ducked down, hoping he wouldn't see me. I couldn't believe he had followed me to Las Vegas. My heart raced as I made a split-second decision to slip out the back entrance of the casino. I hurried through the dimly lit corridors, my pulse pounding in my ears. Once outside, I quickly made my way down the street, trying to blend in with the crowd. I glanced over my shoulder frequently, half expecting to see him close behind. My thoughts were a whirlwind of fear and disbelief. How could he have found me again? I darted into a nearby shop, pretending to browse through the merchandise. My heart raced as I tried to calm myself down. After a few minutes, I took a deep breath and decided I needed to be proactive. I pulled out my phone and dialed the police, explaining my situation. They assured me they would send someone to check the area. I stayed in the store, my eyes glued to the entrance, waiting for the familiar figure to appear. Minutes felt like hours, but I refused to let my guard down. Just as I was about to give up hope, I spotted a police car pulling up outside. Relief flooded over me as the officers stepped out and entered the store. I quickly approached them, explaining everything once again. After taking my statement, the officers offered to escort me back to my hotel. I gladly accepted, feeling a sense of safety in their presence. We walked through the bright lights of the strip, the energy of the city feeling electric as we moved through the crowd. When we arrived at my hotel, the officers ensured I was safely inside before leaving. I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, my heart still racing. I felt both exhausted and relieved, grateful to be in a safe space. That night, I lay in bed, trying to process everything that had happened. The fear lingered, but I reminded myself that I was safe for now. I took a deep breath and tried to get some rest, knowing that I had to continue my journey the next day. The next morning, I woke up feeling somewhat refreshed, but still anxious. I checked out of the hotel, ready to hit the road again. I decided to take a more populated route, avoiding the desolate highways that had caused so much fear. As I drove towards New Orleans, I felt the weight of my experiences starting to lift. The beautiful landscapes and bustling towns filled me with a sense of hope. I kept my guard up, but I tried to focus on enjoying the journey. After a few more days of traveling, I finally reached New Orleans. The city was vibrant, full of life and energy. I was determined to enjoy my time there, despite the shadows that lingered from my journey. I explored the French Quarter, soaking in the sights, sounds, and flavors of the city. I made new friends, danced to live music, and indulged in delicious food. Each moment was a reminder that I was alive and that life could be beautiful despite the darkness I had encountered. Eventually, as my time in New Orleans came to an end, I reflected on my journey. I had faced fear head-on and emerged stronger. The road had tested me, but I refused to let it define me. As I drove back to San Francisco, I felt a newfound sense of freedom. The highway stretched out before me, a canvas for new adventures. Though the haunting memories of Jake and the rest area lingered in my mind, I knew that I had the strength to overcome anything. The journey had changed me, teaching me about resilience, courage, and the importance of being aware of my surroundings. As I traveled home, I felt a sense of empowerment, ready to embrace whatever life had in store for me. And so, I drove on, the open road ahead, ready for the next chapter of my life, knowing that even in the darkest moments, I had the power to reclaim my story. I've always loved road trips. The idea of the open road, the freedom of driving through vast landscapes with no set schedule, it's exhilarating. I had always dreamed of taking the classic Route 66 trip, seeing the quirky roadside attractions, and feeling that nostalgic, old-school Americana vibe. Last summer, I finally decided to do it. I had no idea it would turn into the most terrifying experience of my life. It was late June, and I had just left Chicago, heading toward Santa Monica. I had mapped out my stops and was planning to take my time, soaking in every sight along the way. The first few days were incredible. Long stretches of highway, small diners with the best pies, and friendly strangers who waved as you passed by. Everything was going perfectly, until it wasn't. I was somewhere in Oklahoma when things started to feel off. It was a long stretch of highway, not a car in sight for miles. The sun had just begun to set, casting the landscape in shades of orange and red. I had been driving for hours and decided to pull off to one of the roadside motels that dot the landscape. I wasn't looking for anything fancy, just a place to crash for the night. The sign for the motel flickered as I pulled up, a classic neon sign that read Sunset Lodge. It looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1950s. The paint was peeling, and the whole place had a run-down, eerie feel. But I was tired, and the thought of driving another 100 miles to find something better wasn't appealing. I walked into the lobby, greeted by the smell of stale air and old furniture. Behind the desk sat an older man, probably in his late 60s, with a weathered face and a cigarette dangling from his mouth. He looked at me like he'd seen 1,000 drifters pass through and didn't care about adding one more to the list. "One room, please," I said, trying to sound casual, even though I felt a strange sense of unease. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but something about the place felt wrong. He handed me the key, barely looking up. "Room 12, last one on the right," he muttered. I thanked him and headed to my car to grab my bags. As I walked toward room 12, the air seemed to grow heavier, the silence more oppressive. The wind had died down, and the only sound was the crunch of gravel under my feet. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The room itself was as basic as I expected: a single bed, an old TV, and a small bathroom with questionable plumbing. I locked the door behind me and immediately checked the window. It faced the back of the motel, looking out over an empty field that stretched out for miles. Nothing but flat land as far as the eye could see. I decided to shake off the weird vibe and settled into bed with my laptop, planning to watch a movie before crashing. About an hour in, I heard something outside. Footsteps, faint but unmistakable. I paused the movie and listened. The sound was coming from just outside the door. I quickly turned off the lights, my heart starting to race. I didn't dare look out the window. Instead, I sat there in the dark, straining to hear. The footsteps stopped, and there was a soft knock on the door. Not the kind of knock you'd expect from someone trying to get your attention. More like a tap, almost hesitant. My pulse quickened. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking slightly. No answer. Another knock, this time a little louder, more insistent. I stood up slowly, my mind racing. There was no reason for anyone to be knocking on my door in the middle of the night, especially out here in the middle of nowhere. I grabbed my phone and checked the time. It was just past midnight. I quickly texted my best friend, telling her where I was staying and that something didn't feel right. She was used to me being dramatic, but this time, I wasn't exaggerating. Another knock, this time louder. I could hear a faint rustling outside the door now, like someone, or something, was brushing against it. I finally mustered up the courage to peek through the peephole. My breath caught in my throat. There was a man standing outside, his face just inches from the door. His eyes were wide, almost too wide, and he had an unsettling smile that sent a chill down my spine. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, staring directly into the peephole, like he knew I was looking. My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped back from the door, trying to stay calm. I didn't know what to do. Should I call the police? Would they even come out here in the middle of nowhere? Another knock, this time harder. I couldn't tell if he was trying to get in or just toying with me. Suddenly, I heard footsteps again, this time moving away from the door. I listened, my heart still racing. After a few moments of silence, I cautiously moved back to the peephole. He was gone. I stood there, staring out into the darkness, trying to convince myself it was over. But then I saw him again, this time walking across the parking lot, toward the field, behind the motel. He stopped at the edge of the field and just stood there, facing the room, watching. I grabbed my phone and called the front desk, hoping the old man could send someone to help. The phone rang and rang and rang. No answer. I was on my own. I considered making a run for my car, but I'd have to cross the parking lot, and he was still out there. My mind raced with worst-case scenarios. I decided to wait it out, hoping he would lose interest and leave. After what felt like hours, I checked the window again. He was gone. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed huddled in bed, every creak and sound making me jump. When the first light of dawn broke through the window, I finally let out a breath of relief. I packed up my things as quickly as I could and bolted out of that room. As I passed by the lobby, the old man behind the counter didn't even look up. It was as if he knew and didn't care. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the man standing in the field, watching me leave. But he wasn't there. The rest of my trip was uneventful, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in my chest. When I finally got home, I did some research on the Sunset Lodge. To my horror, I found multiple stories of strange encounters at that motel. People disappearing, strange figures appearing in the middle of the night, and travelers reporting eerie knocks on their doors. I still don't know who that man was or what he wanted, but I do know this. I'll never forget his eyes, staring into mine through the peephole, like he was looking straight into my soul. Since that night, I've never stayed at another roadside motel, and I don't think I ever will. That was the last time I let the thrill of adventure cloud my judgment. Now, every time I plan a road trip, I make sure to stick to well-lit, busy places with plenty of people around. The open road still calls to me, but I'm much more cautious now, because you never know who or what you'll encounter out there in the dark.